Ah, the wonderful world of professional wrestling. Sports entertainment. Sorry, Vince. That being said, you've officially retired now, so allow me to do my best Trips and Shawn Michaels DX impression and say, suck it!
Oh, let's get ready to suck it!
Where was I going with this again? Ah, yes. Wrestling has long been a pop culture staple, and while in recent years it has waned more than a little bit, the rise of a new competitor in the guise of AEW, wrestling is being brought back to the forefront of public consciousness once again. For many moons, we have seen larger-than-life superstars perform carefully choreographed dance rehearsals with one another in order to sell us a story. Whether or not that story ends up being good or not is another question, however, it helped to birth some well-known stars. What could be more fun than choosing one of these stars to control and putting the virtual beat down on your opponents? Nothing. That's the answer to that one. Well, except seeing Vince kiss Rikishi's ass live on TV. But accompanying the chaos we saw on the TV, the WWE, formerly the WWF, licensed a few video game publishers to set about developing games for the amusement of wrestling fans everywhere. Thank you. I also want to go back and see just where wrestling games started to change from the arcadey fun we used to play as kids to what is now a relatively serious simulation game. Now please, strap in, this is going to be a long video. I will include timestamps in the description so YouTube will incorporate them into the play bar so you can jump to whichever game you want to hear me talk about. This is also good because I know this video will be ridiculously long and I'm not expecting anyone to sit through the whole thing at once, so feel free to come back after doing something, I'll still be here. WWF Wrestlemania, the arcade game. There are many games on many systems, I own most but not all of them, so I'd like to take a trip back in time to October of 1995 when Midway Games had released Worldwide Wrestling Federation Wrestlemania the arcade game, which is a perfectly sized title for a video game that rolls off the tongue. Now, I won't spend too long covering this title as honestly there isn't that much to it, but released in 1995 as an arcade cabinet game over in North America, it was rapidly followed up by home console ports of the game to the Sega Mega Drive, or as the Yanks like to call it, the Sega Genesis, the Sega Saturn and its 32X adapter, PC of all things, and even the PS1. The game isn't shy about wearing its influence and inspiration on its sleeve, in that of Mortal Kombat, offering a very similar experience, just instead of brutal finishes they have vastly toned down, and instead being cartoonish violence, because we can't have actual violent and adult themes in the WWF now, can we, boys? Yeah, just ignore all of that. The game is very fast-paced, hardly giving the player time to think. This results in me just spamming random-ass buttons in the hopes of doing enough damage to win by some fluke. I mean, I could actually read up on the controls, but why would I do that? Reading's for nerds. But seriously, even after brushing up on the controls, I'm still clueless as to how to best implement moves in the game to get the big fat dub. It seems like whatever I want to throw at my opponent, they have a counter for. Now, I know that with this originally being an arcade game, that by design it would be a coin sink. The whole, oh you failed, no worries, carry on by filling my slutty little hole with quarters, the machine says to you. And with this being a home console port, a whole 2 generations before microtransactions became the norm, I feel like either I just suck or this game is sadistic in its punishment of the player. But, difficulty aside, what does this game have to offer besides making you want to pull your own intestines out through your anus? Well, WWF Wrestlemania, the arcade game, has a stacked roster for you to choose from, a whole 8 wrestlers. Wow, 8. With these 8 wrestlers, we are truly spoilt for choice in that we get the Bad Guy, Razor Ramon, the Dead Man, Undertaker, the Wild Samoan, Yokozuna, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, the Total Package, Lex Luger, the Beast from the East, Bam Bam Bigelow, the Excellence of Execution, Bret the Hitman Hart, and last but by all means not least, Doink. Doink. Really, you could only afford 8 superstar slots and you chose one of them to be Doink. Why in fuck's name would you do something like that? Ranked 118 on the list for most popular wrestler of 1995. Fucking Doink! What I mean to say is, I'm disappointed by that. I mean, I get that Doink is probably a good fit for the cartoony nature of the game, but you could have had Diesel, Sting, Sabu, Scott Steiner, Eddie Guerrero, Rick motherfucking Flair. Now, yes, I'm well aware that not all of the names I've just mentioned were contracted to the WWF at the time, and that is fair enough. But really, all the stars you want to put in your game, the comic relief clown is your pick. Okay man, sure, whatever, it's your rodeo. Now, the game will make you pick one of these 7 great talents, or Doink. Then you have the difficult task of slogging through a gauntlet of matches against other superstars. I'm lucky to get past my second match. The AI is just that damn tough. Or I suck. One impressive thing that I will give the game credit for is that there are 2 championships to slog away for. There is the prestigious WWF Championship, or to spice things up a little bit, the Intercontinental Championship. Both of these gauntlets will kick your ass and you'll want to throw your console out the window when you are done. Enjoy. These matches aren't just one-on-ones though. While there are a few one-on-one matches, there are also 2-on-1 handicap matches to really punish you. Also, your opponent can get second wind and just kick you off them when you've depleted their health and are going for the pin. You don't get a refresh health bar though, and when the AI do this, they always seem to turn into the goddamn Hulk and smash me senseless. Wait, can I rephrase that? Now, with this being, first and foremost, an arcade game, there is multiplayer. You can attach a second controller, and only a second controller. Remember, the PS1 only had 2 controller ports. But the arcade cabinet had only 2 sets of controls also. But what chaotic multiplayer shenanigans can you partake in? You can go head-to-head in singles match action, stomping a mud hole in your friend, or you can pair up as a tag team to take on the gauntlet of opponents. It's fun, but quite rough around the edges. It definitely feels like a comical, gimmicky Mortal Kombat, and it's fun to experience for the curiosity value alone, but as a gaming experience, I'm not that entertained by it. Worldwide Wrestling Entertainment, more like Worldwide Wrestling Boredom. 3 out of 10. Bland and disappointing. WWF In Your House. Now with WWF In Your House, it is very much the same sort of thing as WM Tag. The gameplay is almost identical, still using sprites for their characters, which I don't hate as horribly pixelated as it looks. But PS1's gonna PS1, so I can't knock it for the hardware limitations. So yes, looking back at this through the eyes of a Gen Z millennial reviewing these old games in 2022, the games are goddamn hideous. But I bet for 1996, a whole 2 years before I would grace planet Earth with my presence, this might have been regarded as decent. This time around, we're given a much larger roster. This time we get 10 wrestlers to choose from. Again, 10. Wow, really going out there. We get, for our amusement, a returning HBK, a returning Undertaker, a returning Brett, alongside his brother Owen Hart. Other new faces include, making his WWF video game debut, though not his first video game appearance, Vader. Ezekiel Jackson, Ahmed Johnson. He wouldn't actually debut as Ezekiel until January of 2007. The British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith. Dustin Rhodes as Goldust. The Ultimate Warrior. A young Paul Levesque as Hunter Hearst Helmsley before he became The Game. So roster-wise, a better selection. A bit more akin to what would have been on TV. Of course, I don't know. I wasn't born. Feel old yet, Boomer? I'm joking, of course. We love our silver tops. So, the gameplay is very similar to the previous game, still very Mortal Kombat-y. You can still perform some wacky moves, though the cartoonish nature appears to be toned down a notch or two. Thank God. So this game was released on Halloween of all days. Yeah, I know, it's fucking spooky. Just look at how hideous some of these sprites are. Jokes aside though, this game feels kind of empty. It somehow manages to do exactly what the previous game does, but look worse. The moves are much less fluid, the fantasy moves, like lightning, just look plain awful. Really bad special effects. All of the arenas are fantasy locations, or the Heart Dungeon. Undertaker has a creepy crypt, rather on point for the dead man, though I can't fault that one. There's an arena based on playing cards for Owen the King of Hearts. Goldust has a cinema, really bizarre places. Then there's this Roman setting, and why it exists is beyond me because none of the roster are Italian or historical. The one good thing I can say about this is now there are 2 championships and a season mode, though don't be expecting anything akin to what we're used to in the present. It's a gauntlet progressing through one-on-ones against the rest of the roster. It's a decent time waster for a few minutes, but beyond that there really isn't too much to it. It graphically looks hideous. The arenas are interesting, to say the least, with a few of them not really making any sense. The larger roster is a welcome change, but the roster's only increased by 2 slots. It still has more than Mortal Kombat, so that's a win, I guess. I found the matches bizarrely easier in this entry though, as the difficulty had been toned down a smidge. This could be for a number of reasons. I could actually be getting good at these older games, subconsciously learning attack patterns and how to counter them. Or more likely the fact that WWF In Your House was entirely a home console game, no more arcade cabinet, and so no incentive to make it a coin sink. Multiplayer wise, the game allows for 4 players, which did take me by surprise, seeing as the PS1 only had 2 controller slots, leading me to Google how you'd get 4 players on a PS1. It was indeed possible by using a peripheral called the multi-tap adapter, which is like a USB extender. It gives you more controller ports. So that's something interesting. Pointless tech history aside, would you really want to play this with a friend? I can envision that friendship not lasting too long. Honestly, it's not a terrible game overall, but it does feel conceivably worse than its predecessor. How you could achieve that and still have a working product is impressive, but this game just isn't that fun. Gets a 3 out of 10, no better than its predecessor, monotonous to play through. WCW vs The World. Ooh yay, our first non-WWF game! WCW was a rival promotion formed in 1988. WWE/F was founded in 1953, and so WCW had a big challenge on its hands to compete with such an established promotion. However, under Ted Turner's leadership, they managed to square off and go toe-to-toe with Vince's flagship wrestling show on Monday night, Raw. This ratings war lasted into the turn of the millennia and ended when Vince threw enough cash at WCW to become owner. But enough history, you're here to see how good or bad PS1 wrestling games are, so that's what we're gonna give you. Now, I opened the horrible PS1 jewel case and was greeted by a game staring back at me that was not WCW vs The World. I had bought a bundle of WCW games from a seller on eBay and I got 4 WCW games from him. I opened the WCW vs The World and was left stunned at the fact that the case was WCW Backstage Assault. I panicked thinking, oh god, I bought this months ago, why didn't I check it, thinking I was duped out of my hard-earned cash, but no, WCW vs The World was in the Backstage Assault case. Thank Christ. So after one minor hyperventilating session, I load up WCW vs The World. So WCW vs The World is a big game for wrestling media as it stands out as the first 3D wrestling game on the PS1. Now the fact this game is in 3D, which is whoa so cool and hip man, just makes the game stand out as miles ahead of the previous entries. But graphically, while it does stand out as a huge technical leap over previous games, it still is incredibly blocky, and I know that back in the day on an old CRT TV you wouldn't be able to make out the finer details like I can on my LCD TV. I get it, yeah, it's fine, but it looks horrid, so blurry and blocky. Am I playing a wrestling game or watching a Minecraft slideshow? Jesus. Now, given the fact this game is in 3D, we see the foundations being laid for how wrestling games will inevitably be for the next 25 years. I get it, 25 years is a long time and we have come so far since then, but this just hurts my eyes to look at, honestly. I'm not saying it's bad by any stretch of the imagination, but when I talk about the controls and the camera, you'll understand why not really being able to make out what's happening can be a bit of a problem. Now, to mention the controls, and oh my god, it is convoluted to say the least. I know there wasn't an example of how a wrestling game controls should look yet, I get that, but my god, there's a lot of awkward clunky controls. X is attack. Kick is hold X. A power attack is R2. To dodge backwards and out of the way is R1. Taunting is done with L2, and to dive you press L1. You block with square, and though it never really seemed to work for me, running and pinning are done with the same button, which I'll let you figure out why that can cause problems. But you press triangle to pin and run. You can hit counterattacks in this game by tapping the square and then X, and you Irish whip by tapping circle and holding a directional key. You can perform slams when your opponent is groggy, meaning you'll have to hit them with a load of punches and strikes first, making the game kind of annoying as it seems that no matter what I try, my opponent counters. Control-wise, it is just a convoluted mess, but it began to put in place the unified controls we expect from a modern-day wrestling game. So, how about that roster? Let me guess, do we get 12 wrestlers this time? No, but good for you for noticing a pattern. This game actually blew me away with its roster size of 60 superstars. Now these 60 are mostly rather well known. You have your WCW wrestlers in the form of Hulk Hogan, the one we don't mention anymore, Eddie Guerrero, Lex Luger, Sting, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, Rick Steiner, his brother Scott Steiner, Dean Malenko, Ultimo Dragon, William Regal, who's under as Steven Regal, which is news to me, is a name he used to wrestle under in the 90s. Scott Norton, who was named Billy Gaijin. I can't find any reference to Billy Gaijin outside of this game. The Giant, later known as The Big Show, and Jeff Jarrett. There were also 1 or 2 WWF wrestlers, but mostly to fill out this roster size, they pulled wrestlers from overseas in the New Japan territories. EW Japan, Michinoku, UWF International, All Japan Pancrase. So obviously that's where the versus the world part of the title comes from. I appreciate that, it really goes to highlight other promotions and talents that is rather just wholesome. The thing is though that WCW vs The World is an altered version of Virtual Pro Wrestling released in September of 1996. Many wrestlers have been renamed due to licensing. So the game has numerous similarities to the N64 Aki titles. There's varying levels of grappling depending on how long you hold the grapple button. There's no health bar, instead being replaced by a spirit meter, where the match momentum moves in this tug-of-war style. If one wrestler is really in the zone, you're going to be groggy as hell. This is beginning to expand on the wrestling arsenal, but in a clunky step to greatness. Now, in terms of game modes, you can really tell this is a Japanese local game that has just been translated and ported to the worldwide stage. The modes are League Challenge, Best of 7, Exhibition, Elimination, Tournament, League, and Double Title. These modes are really characteristic of Japanese wrestling titles. Being the first wrestling game developed by that studio that would come to be revered during the end of the PS2's lifespan, I really think THQ showcased their best efforts here and have since really expanded on them. Overall, a definite improvement upon previous entries, but still a clunky, convoluted mess of a grappler. 5 out of 10. Powermove Pro Wrestling. Powermove Pro Wrestling graced the market in 1995, which still has 3 years on me. My god, I'm so insignificant when put beside these titles. But this time, the big publisher that's on track to become the new most hated corporation in America, Activision, tried their hand at releasing a wrestling video game. Developed by the incredibly talented boys at Ukes. We miss you, Ukes. And THQ, for that matter. Now, the case for Powermove Pro Wrestling is unusual in that it's not a PS1 dual case, but instead a dual CD case. Yet, the game only has 1 disc. Just a little unusual. I checked every copy out there, it seems to have the same case, so it's not that I got it from a seller who tried to change the case because the dual cases were notoriously fragile. Gameplay wise, the fighting is a touch bizarre. The game employs a kind of rock paper scissors mechanic that there is no sort of on-screen indication for, you just gotta guess that's what's going on. Strikes beat grapples, submissions beat strikes, and grapples beat submissions. You can Irish whip, run, perform rebound moves, top rope moves, and fight outside the ring, though I haven't worked out how to do almost any of that yet. The thing is with many PS1 games is that yes, they may come with an instruction book, there's no kind of tutorial. While I'm not asking for the game to hold my hand through matches, I would just appreciate being told what in fuck's name I'm meant to be doing. Now, there are a few modes available to play. The thing is that they are all very similar. There's exhibition matches with optional 2-player so you can make your little sibling cry. Try a gauntlet of the roster, fight for the championship, and compete in a tournament. Yes, this is based off a Japanese game, how could you tell? Sadly, there's only singles matches. No tag teams, no extreme matches, you won't find Hell in a Cell or tables matches or even Extreme Rules or submission matches in any of the titles I've mentioned thus far, which kinda sucks a bit. Now, Powermove Pro Wrestling does something I find very interesting. The match will open up to you facing your opponent and a ring announcer is with you. He'll hype up the crowd, announce the fighters, and then dip, leaving you to try and kick your opponent's ass. The match time is kinda wild though, it flies by so fast. While you can technically set a 25-minute long bout, it will only really take about 10. This is the first time we see a ring announcer in any of these games. There's no commentary however, so I guess this is to make up for it. Whereas all the entries previously had some form of commentary bar the WCW VS The World entry, I find this to be a neat little thing to include. Now, there's no named wrestlers in this entry, there are only random wrestlers that are fictional. Not a terrible thing, but there's no real star power to make you want to pick this game up, which is a point against its name. One thing that is kind of awesome, if not a bit jarring at first and a waste of controller buttons, is the fact you can rotate the camera around the ring, which is cool, and I wish this feature would make a comeback, but maybe put it in the options as opposed to giving it dedicated buttons. It takes away buttons you could use for controls. Overall, not a terrible game, definitely fun and technical wrestling, but it can be a little bit confusing with the rock paper scissors gameplay, and its moves, which are all wrestler specific, making it not the friendliest of titles for newcomers. I give it a 6 out of 10. It's not awful. WCW Nitro. Ooh, WCW Nitro is a real mixed bag. It has a decent, though small roster, but its gameplay is not enjoyable at all. Released the year I was born in 1998, it's a shit show, honestly. The match pace is unbelievably fast, like is everyone on speed here or something? The game is so fast paced it's difficult to know what to do. Now in this game I ran into the same problems I did with a few earlier entries with the controls. Sure, they're listed in the instruction book and online, but you try and put them into action and your character just stands there and gets suplexed. Roster wise, we don't have a bad selection to choose from here, with the likes of Sting, Kevin Nash, Ric Flair, Lex Luger, Randy Savage, Hollywood and regular Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, Eddie Guerrero, Alex Wright and Dean Malenko. Or as the back of the games box calls him, Dean Malenlo. Yeah, they made a boo-boo on the blurb. GGTHQ. He who shall not be named for obvious reasons, CB, The Big Show, Kevin Nash, Booker T, Stevie Ray, Diamond Dallas Page, and X-Pac, or Six as he was known. Not a bad roster. The cool thing is that by hovering over any of the wrestlers and pressing circle, you get a rant option. Using this, you're greeted to a fantastical low quality, like seriously low quality, it's less than 240p FMV of the wrestler shit talking you into picking them. It's rather funny, but once you've seen them all once, there's no reason to do it again.
You know, brother, you think you've got what it takes to beat Hollywood Hogan? Watch you climb in the ring and try out the largest arms in the world. Hollywood style. If you want to wrestle an inch more Ric Flair, you gotta be able to walk that aisle and style and profile. Woo!
So, a decent roster, a decent promotion, but shoddy gameplay and controls. I really don't want to spend too long on this game as it just hurts to play. But the game has single player tournament, single player exhibition, a versus mode for multiplayer, and the game does have tag teams, but they slow the game down a smidge, making the game actually a bit easier to get some hits off. The modes on offer to you here are singles, tag teams, and WCW Nitro Challenge, which all in all isn't a whole lot to offer, especially given the gameplay shortcomings. Overall, it's a bit of a mess, not fun to play at all, 3 out of 10. WWF WarZone. This is actually the first of the PS1 games I got, as I found it on eBay ridiculously cheap. At the time I knew very little about the PS1 wrestling games beyond the Smackdown games. You know, there was also the fact I had my boy Stone Cold on the cover, which drew my peanut little brain to this listing. So I hit buy, it didn't cost too much, and I waited a week before I knocked on my door. Hello Mr. Postman, then I gave it a try. When you load this game up, the intro videos is one of the most hyped sequences I've seen. To be fair, graphically this game looks a little bit better than the ones we've already talked about, but it's still a PS1 game, so don't be expecting any artistic gold. This game has a decent enough roster though, featuring Ahmed Johnson, Davey Boy Smith the British Bulldog, Farouk, Goldust, Kane, Ken Shamrock, Mankind, Mosh, Owen Hart, The Rock, Shawn Michaels, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Thrasher, and The Undertaker. With several characters you can unlock via cheat codes, including characters Jack, Dude Love, Pamela, who is an employee at Iguana Entertainment, Rattlesnake, Steve Austin, but better, he's also wearing jeans, Sue, who is a ring girl with Bret Hart's moves, Trainer, a character based on the QA tester Jello, Jeff Robinson, and Turok from the comic book and Acclaim games. So the game's roster is pretty good. While not a huge choice of wrestlers, the choice is good. No stupid additions, all solid choices for a limited roster, plus this game has one of the most important features, create a wrestler. You can finally create your own superstar. Want to step into the ring and lay the smackdown on Dwayne Johnson or go toe to toe with the big red monster? You can do that now. Kinda. I mean, while there are plenty of options for attire and hair, tattoos and moves, it's all incredibly difficult to make a superstar that even closely resembles you. Again, not Acclaim's fault, it's the lack of hardware on the PS1. So roster-wise we've got a decent lineup. What about modes? This is where WWF WarZone sort of falls flat on its face. You have Challenge Mode, which again is a sort of progression-based game mode where you advance through the roster to try and beat everyone. It's okay, it's nothing new though, it's the same mode we've seen in countless other games previously mentioned. We have Versus Mode, which is basically exhibition and multiplayer if you plug in two controllers. Nothing too special about this mode, again it's pretty standard stuff. There's a tag team option which is 2v2, again pretty standard, a nice inclusion as many of the previous games listed either didn't have it or had a very painful time trying to load everything that was going on. We've got a cage match, well not Hell in a Cell, it's a really cool inclusion, you know, beat your opponent down and try and scale the cage to escape, first one to the outside wins. Simple stuff, very fun. Lastly, we have a new game mode, which is the first for all the games mentioned that we have weapons, so we can finally lay the smackdown on our opponents. But we also have a training mode, which allows you to learn the moves of the game that it gives you. An incredibly useful mode, as previous entries I've mentioned. I'm a bit perplexed as to how to pull off any moves at all.
Obviously, as previously mentioned, we finally have the ability to create a wrestler. This is kind of awesome. There are so many attire choices allowing you to create a hideous wrestler that, like I said, PS1 hardware isn't going to be looking like The Last of Us or Uncharted or whatever games Sony ponies hype up to be the pinnacle of realism nowadays. The game's control system, though, is very much like WCW Nitro and Thunder games, but actually giving you the controls to learn by slowing the gameplay down a considerable bit. It's a much more enjoyable experience. We even get entrances. Kind of. They aren't anything too flashy, but it's pretty neat as a side note. The way the controls are implemented, however, feel fresher than the previous titles, and the collision detection is god-awful and poor animation, making your chosen stars feel incredibly stiff in this game. It is kind of fun though. I wouldn't recommend it nowadays, but for back in 1998, this would have been a more than acceptable experience.
Welcome to the World Wrestling Federation. For over 50 years, the dominating force in professional wrestling. Hello everyone, I'm Vince McMahon. I'm Jim Ross. What a matchup this will be.
Pound for pound, Owen is considered one of the best technical wrestlers in the WWF.
He's so quick he can turn the tide of a match with one move.
Austin is cold, calculating, and very, very focused.
Austin hasn't got an ounce of quit in him.
The health system is a little bit unusual too. Both wrestlers start with a green bar, and as the match goes on, you both start wailing on each other. This bar goes down, rather typical. When depleted, you enter a stun state where your opponent can do whatever they like to you. The bar will change colour. After the bar changes colour, you do the process again. When your bar gets to the red and you're in danger of being hit by a finisher, that's not going to be good for your chances of winning. If you can pull off several moves in a row, however, you will get the crowd on your side, chanting for you during this time. You'll be able to do double damage. However, if you do the exact same move spammed over and over, the crowd will boo you and start taking double damage, thus incentivizing the player to try and hit different moves rather than spamming. To kick out of a pin is basic button mashing experience. With regard to the previously mentioned entrances, the music is very clear and distinguishable. Obviously the entrances themselves are very limited in their animation, but what's on offer here isn't bad. Overall, this game is a solid 6.5 out of 10, as it is a definite highlight as so far as being one of the best games I've checked out so far, and it does stand out as miles above the other games. It was definitely a better experience to have played it when it came out, which wouldn't have been me as I wouldn't have even been one yet, but still worthy of some praise for its sound and inclusion of weapons. Overall, not terrible. It gives me hope as we advance through this list. We aren't even halfway at this point. Oh my god, help. I fully understand if you want to pause the video here and go do something else for a bit. Just remember to come back now, you hear? WCW/NWO Thunder. So we're on to our next PS1 wrestling experience in the shape of another WCW title. Sadly, this is not the last WCW game for the PS1, and it is very similar to WCW Nitro, and it is a rather balked game. Again, the controls are clunky, requiring some serious Mortal Kombat levels of combos to pull off any kind of move in this game. It's just not fun. Almost all my complaints about Nitro are still present here. It seems Inland Productions in partnership with THQ just didn't get it, which is weird to say because a few console generations later the wrestling game community would adore THQ, but yes, this was not a fun experience to play at all. And that's really sad because roster-wise it's pretty stacked, featuring many wrestlers from WCW, NWO and the NWO Wolfpack. Like, right from the get-go, you have stars like Goldberg, Booker T, Bret Hart, that one again, Chris Jericho, Kurt Hennig, Dean Malenko, DDP, Hogan, Kevin Nash, Roddy Piper, Scott Hall, Scott Steiner, Sting, The Giant, which is Big Show. And that's just to name but a few. You can also unlock a boatload more stars, which is cool, but then you'd have to suffer playing this dumpster fire again. I really don't want to spend too long on this one as there isn't too much to say about it that hasn't already been mentioned in my Nitro segment. It appears though that THQ, rather than listening to fans' criticisms of Nitro, just somehow mentally decided, yeah, let's do the same thing again, but somehow worse. Like, yes, they added a few things to the game, but they didn't fix the core gameplay, so it's pointless adding any of it because you'd have more fun eating sawdust than playing this god-awful experience. Releasing in 1999, WCW/NWO Thunder boasts an impressive roster mostly consisting of wrestlers, but then again with a few pointless additions, various WCW staff, which, yeah, okay, fair enough, especially if you appeared on TV during this time. I can see your inclusion being meaningful in some kind of way, like adding Vince to the roster of a mainline WWE game. Then there's the game staff, which is okay, sure you worked hard on the game and you deserve to be acknowledged, although did you really work hard on this game, in particular, Little Pinocchio? Besides, yeah, that's what the credits are for us to be like, oh yeah, I wonder who did the animations, and then your name will pop up under animator, and we'd be like, oh cool, good job or bad job, depending on how it went, and then go about our day. I understand as developers you want to have a little fun, but if your slot in the game takes up space for potential roster star, then it's not needed. Then you have more stupid random comedy characters, which again, I get having a robot wrestler T-Rex or whatever dumb shit you've included sounds funny, but the gameplay sucks here, then it's a pointless addition. So the gameplay is largely unchanged. Everyone has a few moves they can pull off if you can hit the various required combos, which you will not be able to do without hours of practice. I'd rather spend that time dunking my nuts in a piranha tank than playing this game. The flow of the game has allegedly been improved, although not really. You can now just spam the same moves to get your opponent's health into the red and then pin. Your job's done. There's a test of strength mechanic where if the two of you go for a grapple at the same time. This wasn't in Nitro, but it looks janky, and to be fair, it wouldn't feel out of place in Nitro. The game modes are nearly identical too, only Nitro Challenge is removed and replaced with, you guessed it, a gauntlet-style tournament where you fight your way through stars to reach the belt. Wow, original. Graphically, it's the same as Nitro. Mechanically, it's the same as Nitro. This is basically just Nitro, but with more shite added to it. You still have the runs and the character select, which I guess can be interesting, but many of the wrestlers seem way cornier than they should be. Almost as if they themselves didn't want to be there, which wouldn't surprise me. I gave Nitro a 3 out of 10. This is worse in just about every conceivable way, so 2 out of 10. Don't even bother. Even if your curiosity is for nostalgia's sake, I promise you it isn't worth it. WWF Attitude. From a really bad game to a pretty decent one, releasing in June 1999 for the PS1 and the Game Boy, the less said about that version the better, and later being ported to the N64 and Dreamcast, WWF Attitude boasts a large roster based on the late 98 roster of WWF, which is fine, but like with many wrestling games, by the time the game hit shelves, the roster was a touch outdated. It's not a problem though, as this roster still slaps. Your expected stars are all here, including but not limited to Steve Austin, The Rock, Undertaker, Triple H, Mankind, Shawn Michaels, Kane, Owen Hart, who had passed away tragically a month before the game's release during a botched stunt in the ring. You will be missed. Goldust and X-Pac. And there are plenty more making their in-game debuts as well, which is kind of neat, including Edge, Christian, Gangrel, Billy Gunn, Chyna, Bradshaw, Mark Henry, Val Venus, Jerry Lawler, and Too Sexy Brian Christopher, to name but a few. Honestly, WWF Attitude is great. It isn't bad at all. It's a relatively complete game. The controls are the best that they have been so far. Still not perfect, but serviceable. My main issue with this is that whenever you try and hit a move, bearing in mind you've got to hit a Dance Dance Revolution style combo to hit complex moves, your opponent can easily hit a move faster than you. It's infuriating when you try and hit some kind of a body slam and you get the brunt of an arm lock. So yeah, control wise it is decent. It took me ages to learn to pin. Of course in my head it's circling down, but that either doesn't do anything or picks up your opponent depending on your placement to the downed opponent. You just gotta tap circle, which is really simple, and I genuinely wasn't expecting it to be so simple.
My goodness, what an idea. Why didn't I think of that?
Now that I know that though, I'm much happier playing. The thing is though, I still have no idea how you hit a finisher in this game. Like with almost every game so far in this list, I haven't hit a finisher once. It's difficult to do. At its core, it's very similar to WWF WarZone, it's just a little bit better. WWF Attitude comes complete with a big roster and a reasonably authentic entrances. Of course, with the PS1 graphics, many stars can look like potatoes, but for the limitations the claim we're dealing with, it's really impressive. Same thing can be said for the music and entrances. While it's great to have included, it can sound often really poor quality due to the amount of files have been compressed down to the hardware. Still, it's a nice inclusion. I want to speak about the game modes, as here we begin to see a transformation into what we know today as a wrestling game. I mean, they're all wrestling games, but there's the inclusion of modes in a wrestling game that if shipped today without, everyone would be pissed. First up, we have the tried and tested exhibition mode, your standard set up a quick match of either one player or two, or four with the multi-tap adapter, as the game case states, where you can set up a match you want to have, the rules, stipulations, and the arena, as well as the superstars partaking in the belt, all fairly standard stuff, still nice to see it included here. We then get a bit of a treat in career mode. This mode will see you choose a superstar and perform shows and matches on a calendar, so like wants a proper season mode type experience. It's good. Of course it's relatively bare bones by today's standards, but the fact it's included here makes me very happy. Just below that is a mode called King of the Ring, where you choose 8 wrestlers to compete in a tournament. The winner goes on to the next match and so on until a pool of 8 wrestlers is 2 competing for the title. It's a good mode to include, definitely has some replayability, but I reckon once you've slogged through it once or twice you'll have seen all the mode has to offer. Next up you have Pay-Per-View, which is a surprisingly in-depth mode for the PS1. You can create your own pay-per-view, you can name it as you please, select a card of 8 matches, and even customise the arena, including banners, curtains, ring ropes and more. The last thing to note about WWF Attitude is that it includes a rather decent custom superstar creator. There's a fair few items to choose from in order to customise your superstar. Of course, good luck trying to make anything that actually resembles you, unless you are the most cookie cutter of styles out there, as the limitations of the system make all wrestlers look like big toes. Still though, for what's here, if only they had worked out the clunky controls, which I suppose after a fair amount of time slogging away at you could learn how to play, I feel isn't the most welcoming to new players. Therefore, if you were playing this back in 1999 and you got a friend to come over and try it out, unless they were super lucky, you would have the advantage of knowing all the moves and combos to absolutely school them, so I can't imagine the friendship would last very long. Overall, it's not a terrible game. I'll definitely give it a higher rating than all the previous games mentioned, but it's still not quite perfect, so it gets a 7.5 out of 10. WCW Mayhem. Another WCW game now, and as you can tell, I'm completely ecstatic about it. It just isn't great. It's not terrible, but by today's standards, it just seems empty. Roster-wise, we do have some big names, but sadly, not too many of them. We've got Sting, Goldberg, Hollywood Hogan, Kevin Big Sexy Nash, Randy Macho Man Savage, Diamond Dallas Page, Bret Hart, Bam Bam Bigelow, Ric Flair, Buff Bagwell, Lex Luger, and Booker T, to name a few. There's a load of unlockable stars, apparently. Haven't seen them. So yeah, roster-wise, it's pretty lacking compared to previous titles. Hell, even compared to previous WCW titles in this list, which is unusual. Now I will say this title was made by everybody's favourite game company, the one and only two-time Worst Company Award winner in America, Electronic Arts. EA have made a few wrestling games, but this was their first attempt, and boy does it show. There's this momentum meter at the bottom of the screen akin to the N64 Aki Engine games. The gameplay here is similar to Nitro and Thunder, only in this title I can actually get a grasp of the controls and I won a match. Sure, it was easy, because I was playing on easy mode, but learning the controls, I still won a match, and that makes, of all the WCW games, this a 10 out of 10. Of course I'm joking, but the fact this is easy enough to pick up and play is a point in its favour. So while the game may emulate the Aki experience with its momentum meter, and that's clearly what EA were going for here, it is still kinda clunky. A noble attempt, sure, and it definitely feels better than Nitro and Thunder, but it still lacks things. Graphically the game is hideous, and there's just no masking that, sadly. The game does feature entrances, which don't look awful here, but the PS1 is obviously being pushed to its limits, and the game still, it just doesn't look right. Lacking any anti-aliasing, there's a lot of what we call jaggies. Straight lines that are broken and heavily pixelated so much they don't really resemble what they were meant to. For example, the ring ropes, the stage, the ring itself, and even character models are badly affected by this, just making the game look ugly. Now, of course, it'd be really unfair to judge a 23-year-old game by the standards we associate with modern-day releases, but I mean, just look at it. Even for 1999, this must have looked shite. So, paired with ugly graphics and a small PP roster, what does Mayhem actually have to offer the gamers of 1999? Well, to its credit, it was the first wrestling game to offer backstage areas to fight in, which is kinda cool, I guess. I mean, the backstage areas all look awful, but hey, it's a novelty, I suppose. Sure, let's go beat somebody up by this painted-on urinal on the wall. Of course, the game's inclusion of backstage areas is accompanied by weapons. Not a new thing we've seen in several games previously mentioned, but it is a nice inclusion. I did briefly touch on the controls earlier, and yeah, they definitely seem easier than previous entries in the WCW lineup, but that being said, many moves can still feel incredibly clunky. But they're actually performable in this game, so I'll give it some praise for that. So, interesting bit of history here. The reason EA were called in to develop this game, which was because THQ had been working with WCW, making their previous entries, which came as a surprise because THQ are seen in today's wrestling gaming world as the standard, but their early PS1 WCW games sucked. Regardless though, THQ were partnered up with WCW, and WWF were making games with acclaimed studios. Failing to match the apparent success of WCW's entries, the WWF said to Acclaim,
You're fired! What?
And sent them packing. The WWF sought out to THQ to develop WWF games, and so WCW, not wanting to share the competition, ended their partnership with THQ, which is where EA stepped in. For the first wrestling game, EA didn't do a bad job. Still not great though. Now, Mayhem did feature a game mode which is unique to other grappling titles, and it had a pay-per-view mode, which while in itself is nothing new, we've seen modes called pay-per-view before. The mode allowed users to enter codes to unlock real-life pay-per-view lineups. These codes were offered on the Monday Night Nitro before a big pay-per-view. This only lasted a few months, however. The smaller roster size meant that the game was outdated quickly following its release. Not a surprise really, wrestling games still have this problem in the world of live service updates today, but I think that was a pretty cool thing to include. Truthfully, it's not an awful game. The controls feel much better and I can actually pull off moves. This finisher system is a bit clunky, but it's still passable even if I can only work out how to do it with certain superstars. Now, there's several modes on offer in WCW Mayhem, those being Quick Start, which of course is your basic exhibition match, Main Event, which as far as I can tell is exhibition again, but flashier, I could be wrong on that. It literally put me in for one match and then booted me to the main menu. You then have Quest for the Best, which is a mode similar to many previous games' sort of career mode, where you choose a superstar and you have to run through several other stars to get the gold. That sort of thing, yada yada. We've seen this all before, nothing new till WoW is here. Then there's a pay-per-view password mode, which is just a mode for you to enter those pay-per-view codes I mentioned earlier. Nothing flashy, just a way to unlock some more arenas, match up stars. This is also a way to enter cheat codes, if that's your thing. Surprisingly, WCW Mayhem has a pretty in-depth creator wrestler, allowing you to choose the obvious, like a character's skin colour, hair, beard, attire. Then it goes on to allow you to select tattoos and sunglasses, as well as piercings. Sure, by today's standards it's pretty tame, but for $19.99 this must have been at least decent. Of course, I wouldn't have been able to have told you, I would have only been 1 year old. Then you've got the settings menu, so typical stuff like your language and sound options, all really expected stuff. So for what's on offer here, it really is a definite improvement on the previous attempts, and for once I don't despise EA's efforts here. Of course, this is $19.99 EA, before they realised they could sell you half a game for full price and kick you in the balls and demand another $60 for the rest of the game. Hell, the entrances are somewhat impressive compared to previously as well, still nowhere near attractive to the eye, but being a hot mess of blocky pixels. It's still serviceable, and there's some basic lighting and pyro effects, but it's nothing that's really going to blow you away. This gets a Chernobyl 3.6, not great, not terrible.
3.6 Rontgen, but that's as high as the meter.
3.6. Not great, not terrible.
No, adding points just makes this annoying if it's not a 5, and it's truly better than previous, so I'll give it a 5 out of 10. I just wanted to use that old dead-ass meme. ECW Hardcore Revolution. God damn, it took 10 titles to get to an ECW game. This is in date order, by the way, which is bizarre seeing as ECW was founded in 1992, so it was hardly a late bloomer to professional wrestling compared to WWF and WCW. It was the freshest face, but still. Releasing in Europe in March 2000, ECW Hardcore Revolution upon its release received mixed reviews, so I'm setting my expectations accordingly. So, ECW, upon wanting to make a wrestling-themed game, came to Acclaim. The two groups were in a pretty bad way financially after Acclaim were ditched by the WWE or WWF, and the next WCW game was a few months away. Seeing as to how that game turned out, it's no surprise that Acclaim wanted a quick cash grab project to make some money from wrestling marks at the turn of the century. ECW Hardcore Revolution was built on the same engine as the WWF Attitude, just with an ECW skin painted on it. I'm not really sure how I feel about that, as I like WWF Attitude, but still with very little improvements, it's hard to say this version is better. Of course the roster's pretty neat with all the superstars here, aside from Raven making their video game debut. So we have the in-game debut of Rob Van Dam, Sabu, Tommy Dreamer, Taz, Rhino, Just Incredible, Mike Awesome, New Jack, El the Murderer, cool. C.W. Anderson, Axel Rotten, Spike Dudley, Super Crazy, Little Guido, Tommy Rich, Chris Chetty, Danny Dorino, Dawn Marie, Francine, Jazz, Jack Victory, Jason, Big Sal, and Wild Bill, just to name but a few. Then of course, in typical PS1 video game fashion, we have announcers, unlockable stars, and jobbers, those being staff members from ECW and Acclaim. Stop doing that, you get your mention in the credits. If you aren't part of the TV product, get out of the roster please, thank you. Again, the game is tough with Mortal Kombat style combos to pull off moves which you're going to want to do to avoid going through the game just spamming your most basic moves. The gameplay is serviceable, I guess. I managed to pull off one or two of the more complex moves, but again it's a pain in the ass to do, requiring some serious muscle memory and the basic knowledge of the combo you want to pull off. Luckily there is a feature in the pause menu listing the available combos you can pull off while your opponent is in whatever state he is in currently. One cool thing is there's blood. I played a match with RVD against New Jack, and we were both wearing Crimson Mask by the time I lost. The gameplay is pretty much identical to WWF WarZone and WWF Attitude, which is a shame that Acclaim couldn't do anything really new with a wrestling IP. I know we're in a rush to release something to start earning some income, but even at the time people knew it was a lazy game. For the modes on offer here, we have exactly the same as offered in the previous WWF games from Acclaim: Exhibition, Career Mode, Tournament, Pay-Per-View, Career Wrestling, Cheat Menu, all pretty standard stuff. I'm not going to go in depth as we've seen this all before, and let's face it, this video is long enough as is. So, what can I say about ECW Hardcore Revolution? It's lazy, sure. The roster is pretty neat and rather expansive for what we get here. I appreciate being able to play as various ECW alumni. During its heyday, ECW did have some great talent. Paul Heyman didn't do a terrible job with ECW, but it never really managed to drum up the fan base that it deserved, bringing that attitude to professional wrestling that would go on to define the era. I wish it stuck around for a little while longer, but surely this game could not have helped ECW's reputation. Sure, playing as ECW stars is a neat little novelty, but a lazy game does not make for a good initial impression. And it is unfortunate as the novelty wears off quickly and you feel like you played it before several times over. I will give it credit for including the barbed wire death match, however I could never really pull off the Irish whip move as it came off as clunky. I know now how you perform the Irish whip, it just never seems to work. I managed it once or twice and it looked like it hurt when I sent my opponent into the barbed wire ropes, which is a fun little gimmick match, but that's about all ECW Hardcore Revolution has to offer. 4 out of 10. I'd score it higher if it wasn't just a reskin of the 2 games previously mentioned. WWF Smackdown. Finally, some good fucking food, as Gordon Ramsay would say. WWF Smackdown is the beginning of the gold standard for wrestling games on the PS1. It really lays the foundation for wrestling games even up to the present day, and honestly it isn't a bad start. So first off, the gameplay is really fluid and fast. It isn't chaotic like WCW Nitro levels of speed, but it's a fast-paced, arcadey type of wrestling game. Stinking it was, ECW Hardcore Revolution, then THQ come in big dick swinging, ready to show the world what a real wrestling game looked like. So, what's on offer in this game is pretty good, so let's start with the match types. We got single match, understandably. Tag match, again, nothing too out there really. Handicap match, sort of new, but not really. Battle Royal, sadly only 4 persons involved. Royal Rumble, again only 4 persons. King of the Ring, which is an 8-man tournament decided over 4 matches. Hardcore, which is no rules, grab a weapon and go ham. Falls Count Anywhere, a first time entry for the mode. Not super exciting, but definitely adding some variety. Cage match, escape the cage to win. Survival match, a really weird way to name a 3-way or 4-way match. Special referee, another newcomer mode, one that sadly hasn't stuck around. Have a superstar be a ref, they can interfere in matches and be arseholes. And I Quit matches. A third new mode, again it's sorely missed, make your opponent retire. We got a good selection of match types on offer here. For game modes we have Exhibition, create a pay-per-view, Season mode, which is a really unusual mode. It's based on what we know Universe mode to be, but you can't choose what matches happen. You either watch the CPU fight or skip matches. You can select a superstar to play through the season, which is cool, and create a superstar, so not that much to choose from. Graphically, this is the best looking PS1 wrestling game so far in this list. The wrestlers in the ring, while looking rather pixelated, especially when compared to their actual Titantron videos and their entrances, which is an odd choice. I get you're proud of your creation, but the comparisons aren't too flattering. But I do get they resemble the stars and can't hate it too bad. The crowd is really low-res PNG, animated with stop motion, and it doesn't look great. It looks sort of like an old grainy photo of a WWE match. The superstars actually cast shadows. We're really pushing the PS1 to its potatoey limits here. The controls here are really good too. It feels like THQ really put some time and thought into how everything will come together and really tried to make a comprehensive and responsive game. You can easily hit moves in this game, and that's really appreciated, especially after suffering through some of the wonkier controls in earlier titles in this list. It's 1 button to strike, 1 button to grapple, 1 button to reverse, and 1 button to run. The only annoying thing is about the fast-paced fluidity of the game is how quickly people get up after having the wind knocked out of them. The roster here is pretty good too, although the font they use in the roster select being compressed so much makes it nigh on impossible to read the names here. But to grapple with, we have Al Snow, The Undertaker, X-Pac, Edge, Gangrel, Chris Jericho, Christian, Kane, Ken Shamrock, Godfather, Shane McMahon, Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Steve Blackman, Mark Henry, Chyna, Devon Dudley, The Rock, D'Lo Brown, Test, Deborah, Tori, Triple H, Hardcore Holly, Bubba Ray Dudley, Val Venus, Big Show, Big Boss Man, Mr. Ass, Vince McMahon, Farouk, Bradshaw, Paul Bearer, Mankind, and Road Dogg. Which, who are we kidding, that's a pretty stacked roster in all honesty. So but for 2000 this was fine. Best out of the lot so far, as Seamus would say, banger. 7 out of 10 hands down. ECW Anarchy Rulz. More ECW. It hurts. This entry at least did away with the WarZone engine and actually appears to be an attempt to make a new game, so Anarchy Rulz, spelled with no E and a Z because spelling is for nerds or something, I guess. Attitude good, being normal bad herder. Despite, according to all reports on the internet, as this game was released in September of 2000 here in Europe, the game apparently being on a new engine doesn't make it feel any different to previous entries. It still feels like Attitude, WarZone and Hardcore Revolution. This game really didn't do ECW or Acclaim any favours in setting its own identity. The most annoying thing about this game is it still has that Mortal Kombat combo style of gameplay. These moves seem relatively unique to stars and situations, therefore meaning you spend far too much time pressing the pause menu and browsing the move list to figure out what move you can do, only for you to try and hit a combo and get interrupted, get slammed to the mat and have to try again. It took me nearly 15 minutes to get somebody's health bar into red to hit a pin. That's a bit excessive in the era of arcade wrestling games. I mean, sure, the game features a career mode, exhibition mode with several match types and stipulations, a creation suite allowing you to create a wrestler, pay-per-view, or interestingly enough, create a stable, which is a neat little addition. But other than that, this game does nothing new. It's the same tired old gameplay from previous Acclaim titles. The new match types are interesting, however. I will give credit to the game for that. They've introduced a dumpster match, which is very similar to what we've seen recently on AEW between the Acclaimed and the Arse Boys, Billy Gunn's sons. You throw your opponent over the top rope into a dumpster and close the lid, winning the match. Tables made it in too, whoop whoop. Here I am saying that match was recent, it was like a solid month ago, Jesus Christ. They even gave us a brimstone match. Again, similar to a battle royal, but throwing someone over the top rope makes them just land on hot coals rather than outside of the mat. Seems interesting, just all these cool modes are hampered by the moment-to-moment gameplay sucking ass. Roster-wise, we have the usual. Angel, B-Billy, Balls, Big Sal, C.W. Anderson, Chris Chetty, Carino, Just Incredible, Dawn Marie, Tony DeVito, Danny Doring, Tommy Dreamer, Electro, Francine, Little Guido, Jason, Jazz, Jerry Lynn, Kid Cash, New Jack, Nova, Rhino, Rhodes, Roadkill, RVD, Super Crazy, Simon Diamond, Sandman, Spike Dudley, Tajiri, Tanaka, The Prodigy, Victory, and Whipwreck. That and there's unlockable stars, but I don't really feel like unlocking them because this game sucks. The worst part is, I only know a small handful of these stars and gimmicks. It really is sad to see that ECW couldn't seem to utilise any more talent than Tommy Dreamer, New Jack, RVD and Spike Dudley. Honestly, ECW as an idea could have worked, but in practice it just felt sloppy in comparison to the WWF. It's a shame, really. This game definitely reflects the quality of the show, however, feeling clunky, uninteresting and lazy. Sadly, I don't think the game is going to win over any hearts and minds of wrestling fans nowadays. I wouldn't even recommend it for nostalgia, it's just bad. That's the problem with this title, it's got nothing going for it, making it a very shallow entry. You have exhibition, career and tournament mode, but that's nothing new. It even has a bio room where you can read up on the various stars, but that's been done before also. Literally, aside from 2 or 3 new match types, it's the same as Acclaim's previous titles. 3 out of 10, and that's being generous. Sure, it isn't as fundamentally broken as some of the games on this list, it just sort of sucks. WCW Backstage Assault. Oh, Jesus Christ, this list is going to kill me, I swear. Another WCW game and another head bashing on the wall experience. So, let me just get this straight, okay? We've got a wrestling game that's not set in a wrestling ring. That sounds like a flawless plan, and I can't see how that would suck at all. Graphically, this game is hideous compared to WWF Smackdown and Anarchy Rulz. Hell, even WCW Mayhem looked better than this. So you can hit some pretty devastating moves. The gameplay does feel incredibly boring and there's nothing really fun to do. Sure, there's some weapons and you can beat your opponent down to get aerial attacks, but it's very basic and bare bones. WCW Backstage Assault released in November of 2000 to generally unfavourable reviews. Gee, wonder why. One thing I will give to WCW Backstage Assault is the commentary from Tony Schiavone and Bobby Heenan. Trust me, without commentary this game would feel really empty.
The best way to put it, Tony, is this guy's a businessman. It just so happens that his business is laying guys out.
So, roster-wise, you have unlocked Asya, Bam Bam, Big Vito, Goldberg, Booker T, Corporal Cajun, David Flair, DDP, Disco Inferno, Doug Dillinger, Hogan, Jeff Jarrett, Jimmy Hart, Kevin Nash, Conan, Major Guns, Mona, Ric Flair, Scott Steiner, Sarge, Sergeant AWOL, Sid Vicious, Stevie Ray, Sting and Tori Wilson. Again, you can more than double your roster with unlockable characters, which I'm not going to do because this game is just awful. So game mode wise, you have an exhibition. There is only one type of exhibition. Sure, you can adjust the time limit and arenas, but it's the same match every time. Then, there's Hardcore Challenge, which is the mode to unlock new stars, arenas and other guff whilst competing for championships. Then you have Hardcore Gauntlet, dubbed for Experts Only. Yeah, okay EA, settle down. Basically, fighting 7 matches with no breaks and no recovery between matches because you like pain and suffering, you enjoy torturing yourself, and you don't care, do you, you sick freak? You can create a superstar if you wish, though personally I'd be insulted to add my likeness to this game. There's also a Hall of Champions, a mode which just seems to be a high score menu, not really sure what it's meant to be displaying other than that really. Honestly, I can understand the thought process behind Backstage Assault, I do, trust me. You want a hardcore type wrestling game, which is fine and all that, but there's no actual in-ring action, it's just a brawler with wrestling stars. I don't see the appeal. It's sad too, as the combat in this game isn't too bad. A bit clunky and the hit detection's wonky, but it's still enjoyable for what it is. Being able to climb on the hood of a semi-truck and hit aerial moves is kind of funny, and using the weapons scattered around is fun. Sadly though, that's about it. The game is just hideous, nowhere near the quality of previous games mentioned, and it falls just short of being anything worthwhile. By not really having any modes worth checking out, it just feels empty, sort of like EA's morals nowadays. This game really isn't worth the time of day. It's a more cohesive fighter than some on this list, though I won't shit on it too badly, but for the lack of any wow factor here is what hinders it. It's just 4 out of 10. WWF Smackdown 2, Know Your Role. Oh, it's so lovely to have a palate cleanser in this list. After the disappointing WCW games and the stunted ECW games as well as the previous WWE games, Smackdown 2 Know Your Role is definitely a refreshing experience. Now, Smackdown 2 Know Your Role plays very similarly to Smackdown 1. It's a good model game to copy. The controls are simple enough to work with, the gameplay is fast, frantic and arcadey, and the roster is pretty stacked here. Released in December 2000 in Europe, the roster of SmackDown 2 is of early 2000s, which is among SmackDown's best years on TV. So the little gripe I had about SmackDown 1 using a damn near indecipherable font for their roster select screen has been remedied, and it's also much easier on the eye. Especially as for much of this list I have been a touch tipsy, as trust me, it's the only way to sit through most of these games. The graphics have not improved since SmackDown 1, which is fine. The shadows look considerably worse in this entry though. I mean, the game really didn't need shadows. I appreciate the effort to include them though, as its attempt to more accurately depict a real match. One really apparent exclusion from this game is commentary. There's no commentary at all, making the game feel a little off base. I know the game's really fast paced, so when you're in the thick of it, slogging it out with your opponent, you may not notice, but now I've pointed it out, you will always notice it. You're welcome. This game has a few interesting modes, from the obvious exhibition, season, create a pay-per-view and superstar, to create a taunt, create a stable and create a manager. Now, create a taunt is definitely an interesting option to the creation suite. You get to pick a starting pose and a finishing pose. The two will then seamlessly blend together using some basic animation and framing. The results don't completely suck. It's a novel idea, not one you'd spend too much time in, but still is really neat that it's here. Creating a superstar is the same sort of thing we're used to. We make a wrestler, and create a manager is no different. Star-wise, we have Prince Albert, Al Snow, Big Boss Man, Bradshaw, Bubba Ray Dudley, Bull Buchanan, He Who Shall Not Be Named, Chris Jericho, Christian, Chyna, Crash Holly, Dean Malenko, D'Lo Brown, Devon Dudley, Eddie Guerrero, Edge, Essa Rios, Farouk, Funaki, Gangrel, The Godfather, Grandmaster Sexay, Hardcore Holly, Ivory, Jacqueline, Jeff Hardy, Kane, The Cat, Kurt on a Perk Angle, Lita, Mankind, Mark Henry, Matt Hardy, Paul Bearer, Perry Saturn, Rikishi, Road Dogg, The Rock, Scotty 2 Hotty, Shane McMahon, Stephanie McMahon, Steve Blackman, Stevie Richards, Take Michinoku, Taz, Test, Tori, Trips, Trish Stratus, The Undertaker, Val Venus, Vince McMahon, Viscera, and X-Pac. Now, this was the last official wrestling game for the PS1, but it is not the end of the list. There is another wrestling game that I had to include, but we'll get to that in a minute. SmackDown 2 really solidified THQ as a mainstay in the wrestling game business, and they would carry on this momentum into the PS2 generation. Which, don't you worry, I will do a video on the PS2 era wrestling games soon. I'll probably break it down though, because I'm guessing by this point this video has well exceeded any time limits I had in my head, and I'm sorry about that. SmackDown 2 is a fun, frantic game that will provide you with some respite if you have a pro wrestling itch and only a PS1 to play. Sadly, it doesn't live up to today's standards though, but it did do a lot right. But it's also missing things that we would come to expect from wrestling games. Still, I take my cap off to THQ for their effort here. A solid and well-deserved 8 out of 10. It's easy to pick up, and whilst not really knowing what you're doing, you can score a cheap win over somebody by pure luck. The Simpsons Wrestling. Oh, do I have to? Just to cap off this list, I bring you one of the worst games ever conceived. Simpsons Wrestling. Why was this a thing? I've enjoyed Simpsons games in the past. Road Rage, Hit and Run, the Simpsons game on the Xbox 360 and PSP. This, though, is not one of those fondly remembered games. On paper, a beat-em-up style game set in the Simpsons universe sounds like fun, especially seeing as how Matt Groening loved the fact that you could kick Marge down the road and hit and run. Now, if I'm being completely honest, I don't hate it, but it really isn't good. You have a few moves that are defined by this stamina or momentum bar, where you can perform a move until the bar increases and you can hit a more devastating move. It's really very basic. It comes across as more of a brawler than a wrestling game. It's arcadey, sure, but definitely not a simulation style game. That's not a bad thing, but while you can grab your opponent, you can't do any real wrestling, it's just various arcadey strikes. You can also jump like gravity doesn't exist. Truthfully, the game just sucks. It's fun for like 20 seconds until the novelty of Simpsons characters wrestling, in air quotes, wears off quickly. The problem with this though is the roster. The roster is there's only 12 characters to choose from and 4 of them are locked, so you have 8 to choose from. 8 from over 3,000 characters in The Simpsons. That's kind of lame. These 8 being Barney Gumble, Krusty the Clown, Apu, Apu, Groundskeeper Willie, Homer, Lisa, Marge, and Bart. Now, I will give credit to the voice cast as they at least put in a faithful performance in an attempt to make this game passable. The thing that really boggles the mind though is not that somebody thought to combine Simpsons and wrestling, but released on the PS1 in March of 2001, a whole year after the PS2 released and the GameCube released in September of 2001. So why a whole year after the release of the PS2 would you make a game for the PS1? Don't say it's because of development time, because this game, if it took longer than a year to develop, then somebody needs a slap because it feels like it was thrown together in a month or two. The thing is, this was developed by Big 8 Productions, and to be fair to them, they only had one game to their name at the time, 1997 Herc's Adventures. So okay, I'm gonna guess they were relatively inexperienced, which is fine. Hey, everyone's got to start somewhere, right? But EA signed up to publish this. EA, you okay, hun? Blink twice if you're in danger. The thing that hurts this game is that The Simpsons is an established IP, and by today's standards, while the show's quality has definitely dipped, writers have come and gone. There have been many good Simpsons games. The Simpsons has been on air since 1989 and is beloved by many. This game kinda doesn't care. Once that novelty of I'm playing a Simpsons brawler wears off, you'll realise there aren't many moves. The fighting is pretty piss poor, there aren't many game modes, or options to keep the game fresh, nowhere near enough playable characters, and each character has too few moves, so I'm not going to waste much more time on it. Like, it's a novel idea, but it's very poorly executed. Knowing EA's track record, especially during the PS2 era, publishing some total bangers, maybe not in wrestling games business, but I can list off many EA IPs from the PS2 era to the original Xbox libraries that prove EA had an idea for what a good game was. This just makes this game more bizarre. 2 out of 10, seriously, don't bother. It's not even worth picking up for a so bad it's good kind of game. It just sucks. And with that, we're finally here, at the end. Every PS1 wrestling game. Sadly, the PS1 didn't have many strong contenders for a solid wrestling game, as clearly this was a very experimental phase for companies involved trying to create something that fans would rally behind, but it just fell flat. None of these games were particularly good, which is a shame, as the era of wrestling that they tried to capture was entertaining. I'm also really sorry it's taken so long to get another video out. I'm just super busy with working and home life that when I get 5 minutes to sit down and chill, the idea of working on a script and recording just sounds exhausting. I'm working on finding something that works for me though, and in time, we'll get there. Regardless though, thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more wrestling video game content, then please powerbomb that like button and feel free to leave me a comment reminiscing about any of the games mentioned or listing games you'd like to see me cover. If this takes off, I'll do videos on the best soundtracks, the best game modes, best rosters and more. So if you guys want it, I'll continue this series tackling the PS2 games, both for the official WWE ones and the more unusual ones, looking at you, Backyard Wrestling and Legends of Wrestling. Then of course we come to the Xbox 360 and almost all the Smackdown vs. Raw games from 2007 all the way to 2011. All-Stars, the end of THQ's era, the dawn of 2K. If you guys really want it, I'll do it. I'm also very close to 500 subscribers, so from the bottom of my heart I want to thank each and every last one of you who watched my content and stuck with me during my unmotivated phase. Like, I say I'm tired, I'm just struggling to focus on things at the moment, it's really difficult. But thank you so much. Regardless though, I hope everyone is doing okay, and I'll be back again with more content shortly. You know, peace, love and hugs, or whatever hippie shit you want to say. Love ya, see ya soon.